Hey, it's sugar-free, I'm on a diet. Hey Missouri, my name is December and I'm with the New Left, and I want you to know that history is crazy. I previously made a video on the separation of powers, and I thought the best example of those powers being tested can be found in the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The Indian Removal Act was a complicated mess, okay? It was a mess. But don't worry, I'm gonna oversimplify the events for you, okay? That's what I do here. It's why you're here, I think. Before we get started, let's clarify the term Indian, okay? Because I'm like that. Real quick, colonizers were looking for a shorter trade route to India. White people were finding out about them spices.
That my best friend. She a real bad
And sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and landed on Turtle Island. Cue awkward turtle. Awkward turtle. They found some dark-skinned people, but not so dark that they couldn't trade. Awkward turtle. That they figured, close enough. Mate. No, that's Australian. So to keep with the context of the story, and because that's the term that was used at the time, we're going to use the term Indian for the remainder of the video. Don't send me hate mail. I understand. I know the difference. I know the difference. What? It's sugar-free. In 1783, the U.S. establishes the Indian policy, which is pretty much a follow-up of the treaty-making era. The Indian policy was pretty much like, hey, we'll be cool if you'll be cool. And now you completely understand what the Indian policy is. It really was just that simple. In 1785, Georgia signs a treaty with the Cherokee Indians over land usage and passage. The Cherokee set some boundaries in this treaty, and Georgia didn't like it. In 1791, they signed a new treaty favoring Georgia. The relationship between Georgia and the Cherokee is now becoming strained. In 1828, Andrew Jackson, or as you probably know him, the guy on the 20, won the presidential election. He ran a campaign on getting rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the Native American. Indians. What? It's sugar-free. God, what do y'all want from me? This finally brings us to 1830, when the U.S. Congress passes the Indian Removal Act. But Davy Crockett, a representative at the time, argued that the act violated the Constitution. You're probably saying at this point, then, okay, what is the Indian Removal Act of 1830? Glad you asked. It was a treaty established by Congress. Okay, stay with me on this. Now, instinctively, you would think treaties are with foreign governments, right? So the treaty would be between Congress and the Indians. But you'd be wrong. It's actually a treaty between Congress and the state of Georgia. Because back then, they didn't know what they were doing, we're being honest. And so Congress had to make treaties with the states. Yep, this is what's happening. Basically, Georgia wanted the natives, the Indians, removed from the South, from the areas that we now call Florida, North Carolina, and Tennessee. The federal government, Congress, wanted the land. Georgia wanted the people removed. Congress wanted the land. Georgia can't break the treaty with the Indians. I'm gonna get this. It's sugar-free. But the federal government could, because they don't have a treaty with the Cherokee. So then Davy Crockett's like, hey, this violates the Constitution. We have this whole Indian policy, remember? Does anyone else here remember? And so the Indian Removal Act goes to the Supreme Court. The question posed to the Supreme Court was this: is it a state's right or the right of Congress to make laws with respect to Indian tribes? And the Supreme Court said, Georgia, you do not have the power. That's my southern drawl. Georgia, you do not have the power as a state to make laws regarding Indian tribes. That right was reserved for Congress. Thus, the Supreme Court had actually established a new power to Congress. Hey. This is where history gets crazy. This is where history gets crazy. Jackson sided with Georgia because he still thought this was up for debate, claiming that Georgia had the right to make laws against their neighbors, which Jackson does not really have the authority to give, but anyway, he was Jackson, so. But Georgia says, yep, we agree. And Georgia goes as far as to make a law abolishing the Cherokee government. It's almost like a two-state solution isn't a real thing. Now remember, Congress passed it, the Supreme Court ruled on it, and it's still 1830 when Jackson says, "Fuck you and fuck your Constitution. I'm gonna sign the Indian Removal Act anyway." The removal that was dictated in this law was itself supposed to be voluntary for the Indians. But the Indians weren't moving voluntarily enough for Jackson, so he decided to help things along. First, he decides to mess with their money. But when that doesn't work, he then brings in the military to voluntarily remove them by force. This leads to the great historical tragedy that we all know as the Trail of Tears, where the Indians are dragged through Missouri and placed in Oklahoma. Yeah, Oklahoma. So where does this bring us? Jackson violated the Supreme Court's ruling. The Supreme Court is supposed to be an equal branch of government established by the Constitution. Thus, Jackson violated the Constitution and therefore qualified for impeachment. Easy. 1 + 1 = 2. But he doesn't get impeached. It turns out that the newly found southern states, the slave states, are not into that whole woke constitution of all men being created equal. So they ignored any calls for impeachment because, they were in power. Who's gonna stop them? Don't ever say that this isn't America. This has always been America. America. So there's your example of a constitutional crisis and what happens when the separation of powers gets deterred. If you want to learn more about this, watch my video on separation of powers. Thank you for watching. My name is December, and welcome to The New Left. You can keep watching at thenewleftparty.com.